Good evening and welcome to Alice in Timberland. I'd like to introduce my co-presenter, Kathy McGraw-Engel, who's also the Vice President of the Surry Historical Society. And this is not our first collaboration. In 1965, while we were both sophomores at Ellsworth High School, we worked on a biology project together. We injected chicken eggs with vegetable dye and hatched colored chickens. Tonight, using the diaries of Alice Gasper, our project is to use local color to paint a picture of Surry during the years of World War II.
Good evening. We are indeed excited to present Alice in Timberland tonight. And we're very thankful to Bill Allen. Not only has he provided us with these event-filled diaries of his grandmother, Alice Gasper, but he has also shared treasured family photos. Bill is pictured here in the center with his sister Linda and his brother Bruce. Alice's 3 grandchildren. We are honored and delighted to have Bill with us tonight and would love to hear the story of how he decided to provide the Surry Historical Society with these gems. We hope this will encourage many of you to share your wonderful memorabilia and memories of the past as well. Please welcome Bill Allen.
I remember seeing a chest, and it was in my grandmother's house. She lived in what the Gatherings is now. And I used to go over there because we lived next door, the house next door. And I kept seeing this chest and was always wondering what was inside. And so it got passed down to my father when my grandmother died. When my great-grandmother died, I went to my grandmother and then to my father. Then it went to me when my father died. So I kind of breezed through it one day and just kind of took out some of these things here and looked at them, picked little pictures and stuff like that. There was a discharge from the Navy of my great-great-grandfather Weber during the Civil War, which I had framed, and I was more interested in that than I was in what was in the bottom of the chest. So, not too long ago, I don't know, probably a couple of months ago, 3 months ago.
In the winter, sometime in the winter.
Yeah, sometime in the winter, I said, I think I'll go down and look through that chest and see. I don't think I have all the pictures digitally. So I went down and I got fishing through it and I found these 3 diaries. One was both years, 1944, 1945, and the other one was 1946. And I said, man, these are interesting. So I brought them upstairs and started to read them. And I happened to see John on Facebook. And I said, geez, I know John, I'll friend him, you know? So I friended him. And then all of a sudden, he goes, well, I'm the president of the Historical Society in Surry. Really? So I said, these diaries got to go to Joan. And so we talked and we figured out as much as we could out of those diaries, put them into digital form, supplied him with some pictures. John and Kathy have worked diligently trying to figure out some of the names and so on in the diary. I'm going to also contribute the original diaries to the society because not quite sure what's going to happen to them after me. So I really remember a lot of memories of this room when I was a kid. We used to have town meetings here. There used to be a basketball hoop up there. And I used to have a key because I lived close by. We used to come in and play basketball all the time. John was telling me tonight that we used to call ourselves the town hall. Was it
When you played here, you said it was Town Hall Animal Ball.
animal? Anyway, I'll turn it back over to John and Kathy for the presentation. I really love my grandmother. I lived with her for a while over in the trailer before she died, but my parents had moved to Old Town, so I was like 16 with no place to go, and stayed with her for years. She was actually more liberal than my parents. She was a flapper. Anyway, I'll turn it back over to them. Thank you for coming.
Okay. Thank you, Bill. So, a little bit about Alice. This is a picture of 4 generations of Alice's family. Alice, on the right, was born on December 20th, 1906. Her parents were Alfred and Minnie Weber. Minnie is pictured here on the left. Alice married Kendall Eugene Allen, who died shortly after their son Kendall A. Allen was born in 1927. Her son, Kendall, is pictured in the center holding his son, Bruce. So it would have been her grandson, Bruce, who was born in 1952. In 1934, Alice married Albert Gasper, to whom she was married for 36 years, thus during the time of the diaries. I was honored to be asked tonight to participate in this program, not only because growing up in Surry I knew her family, but also I knew Alice because I worked with her for 3 summers in the mid-1960s at the East Blue Hill summer cottage of Miss Delight Weston, who was from Stamford, Connecticut. Alice was the cook, who always wore an apron, and sometimes she would drive or take the train to Stamford to help Miss Weston get ready to come to Maine in the summer. In the 40s, Alice also helped babysit Miss Weston's friends' children, Rosaline and Nikki Nowland, when they came to Maine to visit. When I worked at Miss Weston's, Rosalind and Nick had grown up and had their own families. So these diaries are a trip down memory lane for me, even though they were written before I was born. I hope we will jog your memories of yesteryears as well. In addition to Alice's summer job and maintaining a home and caring for her son Kendall, who was in high school during this time, Alice also helped clean other cottages. She babysat for Marion Hartley Mork of East Blue Hill and Janet and Robert Carlisle in Surry, and also at times worked in the Surry post office. In other words, Alice was very busy. Albert was gone in the service during this time, and John will tell you more about him.
Albert Gasper was born in 1908. He married Alice Weber, as you just heard, in 1934. He was inducted into the Navy in 1943 when he was 34 years old. He was posted overseas as shown on the map, and he was discharged in October of 1945. He served in the amphibious forces of the Navy, and his postings included to England, North Africa, Sardinia, Scotland, France, Cuba, and Okinawa. He was posted sometimes more than once to some of those places. Once in a while, he was able to come home for a brief visit by going to Boston and New York, and Alice would meet him there. And I think he once even came home on a furlough during the war years. During the period covered by Alice's diaries, Albert earned a living as a fisherman, a farmer, a logger. He did haying and berry harvesting. Before the time covered by these diaries, he worked in a shipyard. And later on in life, he worked at a paper mill, and finally as a lobsterman in Frenchboro, where he died in 1970. This is a family photo loaned to us by Billy, and it shows on the right-hand side, on your left, Albert's father, Will, Alice's mother, Minnie Weber. The woman in the background is Philena Gasper, who was Albert's sister. And the woman here is Albert's mother, Evelyn. And then on the right, we have Albert in uniform and Alice in front of him. Kathy.
Now to the diaries. This is the first entry for 1944. January 1st, saw the new year in over at Ellsworth, came home, went to movies at night, then came back home and went to Grange. This gives a hint of what Alice did to keep herself occupied while Albert was away, and how community activities such as the Grange played a prominent role in the lives of the citizens of Surry and the surrounding towns. We will focus on some of the various clubs, and we invite you in the audience to share any memories or stories you may have about these. These are some more typical entries. January 20, Mama went to Farm Bureau. I made mincemeat, warm and foggy like spring. Had a letter from Albert, first for a month. He's in England, had a nice trip across. He gained 10 pounds. January 28, another letter from Albert. Was I happy? He's still in England. Hazel was down and we had tea. Lovely day. Leap year, February 29. Busy day. Did a lot of ironing, etc. Beautiful, warm day. Another letter from Albert, still in New York. Called me up tonight. Sewed in the evening. Graham Daniels died February 27th. Frida called me up tonight. That would have been Bob Milliken's mom. These are rather typical entries in Alice's diaries about meetings, weather, house chores such as ironing, friends, and of course letters to and from Albert. You can imagine how she missed him and was of course anxious if she'd not heard from him in a while. It's also important to mention here that Alice lived in East Blue Hill until June of 1944. And so while we'll mainly focus on Surry activities, it's worth remembering that there were many relatives and friends in the surrounding communities, and there were a lot of interactions, as thankfully there still are today. Organizations that she attended both in East Blue Hill and Surry were the Farm Bureau and the Grange. Talk first about the Farm Bureau. The national organization was called the American Farm Bureau Federation. It was established in 1919 in Chicago, in which 34 states initially participated. And so this year it celebrates its 100th anniversary. In 1941, the Farm Bureau was having its convention in Chicago when Pearl Harbor was attacked. Claude Wickard, who was the Secretary of Agriculture, addressed the convention, emphasizing agriculture's critical role in the war effort to protect the nation's food supply. delegates adopted a resolution called a mobilization for absolute victory and vowed to keep up their end of food production. So on the farm, women and boys filled many of the roles left behind by the men who had gone to war or to work in the war factories. Officially in Maine, the Farm Bureau started in 1951. It was developed to lobby for issues important to farm families to preserve the agriculture as an industry in Maine. And post-war Farm Bureau had programs such as Food for Peace, and also in 1955 the Soil Bank, which has become the predecessor of voluntary land conservation programs. And a tidbit of information that the Farm Bureau does, every Thanksgiving, you can be thankful that the Farm Bureau calculates how much it's going to cost for Thanksgiving dinner. A 16-pound turkey and all of the trimmings for 10 people. In 2018, last year, it cost $48.90. Since they just started doing this in 1986, it had to be extrapolated back. But in 1947, that classic Thanksgiving dinner would cost $5.68. Entries about the Grange. January 29th, helped install officers at the Grange. Installing officer was Mrs. Will Saunders. Had a nice time. Mama's chaplain. February 5th, notice it's just a week apart, so they had Grange every week. Went to Grange, helped work degrees. Had a wonderful time. Alice was quite involved in the Grange, as was her mother. As noted, she helped with installation and work degrees. Even after her move to Surry, Alice went to the Eastbow Hill Grange, the County Grange, and the Surry Grange. She also mentions in her diaries going to suppers and dances at the Surry Grange Hall, which seems to be used by other organizations for fundraisers as well as by the Grange organization itself. And here's a picture of the Surry Grange. For a little background of the Grange. The National Grange was formed soon after the Civil War to give farmers a greater voice in society, especially in political matters. And I think it's important to note that throughout its history, the Grange admitted women as equal members. They could assume positions of leadership as well as serving on their own committees, and thanks that mainly, it's said, goes to the founder's niece, Caroline Kelly, who influenced him to give women's rights to the new society. In the 1920s, we saw a move away from the serious debate to more social functions, and there was more emphasis on the degree work and ritualism, as Alice had noted. During the Depression and World War II, the Grange represented inexpensive entertainment. So there were Grange fairs and dances and card playing, all became popular during that time. And after World War II, the emphasis sort of shifted to community activities and community service taking more the forefront of the Grange activities. In 2011, our Surry Arbutus Grange celebrated its 100-year anniversary. And several of the early Granges in Hancock County, including the one in Surry, initially did not thrive. However, the charter was revived in 1905 and finally incorporated in 1911. The weekly packet covered the celebration, and so we have this photo of our own Wilbur Saunders, who is a Grange member. And he told about the history and other personal stories of memorable events of Surry at that celebration at the Surry Grange Hall. Surry Grange is still active, and any members that we might have in the audience, it would be wonderful if you would stand or at least raise your hand, please. Here. Alice moved to Surry in June of 1944. Albert was there to help, but he left before the final moving day. On June 5th. So June 2nd, they were making plans to move. June 3rd, they took a load of mother's things to Surry. And finally, on June 5th, 1944, they moved to Surry. And you might recognize, as Bill had mentioned, this house across the street from us is where they lived, and it is now, of course, the Gatherings. John will now tell us a little bit about Surry.
There were a number of small home businesses in Surry during this period. Susie Carter ran a sewing and dressmaking business out of her home on the Newbury Neck Road at the intersection of what is today Bliss Lane. The house is still there. Alice Gasper and many other women in town brought their work to Susie, and Susie Carter was the mother of Nellie Kane, who was the wife of our famous storekeeper, Willard Kane. Another thriving one-woman business in Surry was Ethel Torrey's Hand Laundry, which she operated for many years on the banks of Meadow Stream, just below Old Schoolhouse Bridge. The photograph shows Ethel and her husband Harry in a lighter moment taking a break from the washing. Yeah.
In addition to club meetings, Alice went to quite a few movies. Here's a partial list of movies she went to in 1945. Some of these movies you may recognize as old favorites. Two of them I actually watched this past year on the Turner Classic Movie Channel. I watched Meet Me in St. Louis and For Whom the Bell Tolls with Gary Cooper and Ingrid Bergman. And the others up here, some of the others are Valley Decision, Incendiary Blonde, My Pal Wolf.
And don't forget Gypsy Rose Lee and Bella the Yukon.
Oh, of course. And also Thunderhead. Alice was also an avid reader. Listed are just a few of the many she read. Alice would often just mention the name without comment, or perhaps a brief critique, such as the entry here, read The Egg and I in the Evening. What a humorous book by Betty MacDonald. But I have to tell you, I was intrigued by this next entry from Alice in August of 1945. Waiting patiently for war news. Canned string beans, went to bed early and read Forever Amber. What filth! Forever Amber was written by Kate Winslet and published in 1944. It was a racy, 972-page historical romance novel taking place in 17th century England. Apparently, Alice was not alone in her assessment of the book, as it was banned by 14 states, the Catholic Church, and Australia. Nevertheless, it sold 100,000 copies the first week, and 3 million over the next 2 years. It became a rite of passage book for teenage girls, and I was just visiting my sister-in-laws recently and just mentioned the book Forever Amber, and they all blushed and rolled their eyes at the mention of Forever Amber. It was made into a film in 1947 starring Linda Darnell and was initially condemned by the National League of Decency. John will tell us about more entertainment.
Thank you. The card game called 83, along with whist and double solitaire, was played frequently by Alice and Albert Gasper and their friends around town. The game is a derivative of Pedro, which was developed in the United States in the 19th century and was played widely during the 20th, but during the 20th century it declined in popularity. 83 is the version of Pedro that seems to be confined exclusively to the state of Maine. Why that is, I'm not sure. Has anyone here ever played 83? I see this in a few of you. We have a list of the rules for 83 on the table in the back. And if anyone is interested, please help yourself, and maybe one of you will want to rekindle Surry's fascination with 83 and set up some games. I'll read you a diary entry from January 5th, 1945. It was very brief. Alice said, "The mill at North Bend burned." So we looked in the local paper, the Housewife American, to try to find the details of that. And there was an article on January 10th, 1945. Headline was, "K.O. Frederick Mill Destroyed by Fire." I'll just read you a piece of it. "The K.O. Frederick Mill, located on the North Bend Road in Surry, was destroyed by fire early Friday morning, January 5th. Prompt response by the Ellsworth Fire Department saved the mill wheel, the dam, and the office building, which were not attached to the main building. The mill was engaged in war production for between 40 and 50% of its capacity. Besides this, it was producing civilian goods and had a large consignment ready, which was to be shipped the next day. The loss, including machinery, finished goods, and building, was heavy and only partially covered by insurance." Mr. Frederick told the newspaper that he planned to rebuild the mill, but that never happened. He salvaged what he could from it and brought them to another mill he owned in Ellsworth, and so that was the end of the North Bend Mill. And I guess I should say it was a mill that made wood products. The Red Cross, raising money for the Red Cross to help the war effort, was a big item in Surry during these years. Oh, and I'm sorry, the mill is shown in this picture, obviously before the fire. Okay, the Red Cross. Alice worked hard on setting up an entertainment held at the Grange Hall, and a diary entry from March 21st, 1945 states, "The entertainment at the Grange Hall this evening went swell. We made $31, there was a big crowd." And interestingly enough, we found a letter from a serviceman, Roger Kane from Surry, who was stationed in Germany during this time. On the 4th of April, he wrote home to his parents, George Elmer and Hazel Kane, and this is what he said, quote, "Ruth Stevens wrote and said everybody had a good time at the Red Cross dance. Well, things here are about the same, only the Germans were caught with their pants down on the Rhine. Must close, write soon. Love to you all, Roger." And this shows how active Surry was in raising funds for the war. From the Housewife American on January 26, 1944, headline read, "Surry leads county in war loan drive." Surry was the first town in Hancock County to exceed its quota in the 4th war loan drive, reporting that it was over the $5,000 quota several days ago. Frank Whitney is chairman of the Surry Committee. And also, let me read you this clip from the Housewife American, January 16, 1946. "The Surry Red Cross will meet at the Methodist Church on Wednesday for an all-day meeting in order to get more sewing done. Come bring your needle and sew. They will gather at 10:30 and plan to have a hot soup for lunch with pickles, crackers, and pie." This is not a picture of Alice Gasper knitting. This is a picture of the actress Betty Davis knitting. She also participated in the knitting and sewing to help the troops overseas. And my very favorite poster from the war years, I'll show you next. Also relating to the knitting drives, remember Pearl Harbor, Pearl Harbor. And one more snippet from the diary. Alice went to the town meeting in 1945, in March, and she wrote, "They voted $1,000 for a serviceman's memorial. But there was controversy developed almost immediately after that. People had different ideas about what kind of a memorial there would be and where it would be located. So the argument went on for over a year, and by 1947, Surry needed to establish its own fire department. So the town in 1947 voted to take the money that had been appropriated for the Servicemen's Memorial and use it to help found the Surry Fire Department. And this photo is the very first fire station that was built for Surry. This photo is from 1949. This building was located just beyond the old Surry Village School, which later became the fire department. But this was the very first building that housed fire trucks for Surry in 1947. And Kathy, back to you.
Newsflash, April 12th, Thursday. President Roosevelt died today. Alice also received a letter from Albert from C. April 14th, Roosevelt's funeral at 4 p.m. Franklin Delano Roosevelt had returned to his retreat in Warm Springs, Georgia, in April of 1945. While sitting for a portrait, he collapsed and died of a cerebral hemorrhage on April 12th at 3:35 p.m. Harry S. Truman was sworn in as the 33rd president that same day. To pay their final respects, hundreds of thousands lined the train route carrying FDR's body from Georgia to Washington, D.C., and then on to Hyde Park, New York, where he was buried on April 15, 1945. Shortly after FDR's death, Alice wrote in her diary, "Russians in Berlin." The Battle of Berlin was one of the largest battles in human history. It started April 16th on the outskirts of Berlin, and the invasion was on April 20th, 1945, which also was Hitler's 56th birthday. The Soviet artillery began shelling Berlin and did not stop until the city surrendered. It is said that the weight of ordnance that was delivered by the Soviet artillery during the battle was greater than the total tonnage dropped by Western Allied bombers on the city. About 3.5 million soldiers from both sides were in that fight, with more than 50,000 weapons and 10,000 tanks. The culmination of the offensive on Berlin was the Battle of the Reichstag, the German parliament building. At the time, it was the highest building in the city center, and its capture on April 30th had symbolic significance. Also on April 30th, Hitler committed suicide in his bunker. Early in the morning of May 1st, the flag of the 150th Rifle Division was raised over the building. This was later referred to as the Banner of Victory. The Berlin troops surrendered on May 2nd. John, tell us more about the war.
Okay. So I'll update you on the progress of the war through Alice's diary entries. These are all from 1945. On May 7th, she wrote, VE Day, Germany has surrendered. How wonderful. Went to Blue Hill, took Dad to the doctor about his rheumatism, dug and canned greens in the evening. August 7th, big excitement. Over new bomb being used on Japan. August 14th. War is officially ended, announced at 7 o'clock tonight. I've sat by the radio most of the day. Oh, such a happy night, wrote Albert and Kent. August 15th, gas is no longer rationing. They lifted the ban this morning. October 20th, one of the happiest days of my life, Albert telegrammed from Boston. He's discharged to meet me in Bangor at 3 a.m. tomorrow morning. November 24th, rationing of everything ended but sugar and tires.
Kendall enlisted in the Army before the war was over, and on May 28th, Alice wrote this in her diary. Kendall left for Army today, went to Fort Devens. Myra and I saw Prescott and Ken off in the morning, spent evening at North Bend, slept in the PM. This is a postcard of Fort Devens and all of the barracks there. Alice was a great mom, sent lots of care packages with goodies, which I am sure, having tasted her cooking, were delicious and a very special treat. In 1945, Kendall went from Fort Devens in Massachusetts to bases in Kentucky, Virginia, and Maryland, and in February of 1946, he was transferred to California and on to Alaska, where he was a medical technician and also worked in a dental clinic. This next slide is a picture of Alice and Kendall and Myra and Prescott Whitney. And John will tell us more about the Whitney family.
Yes, Prescott Whitney, who after the war became an artist. And most of you are familiar with this watercolor. It's his famous painting of the old Surry Village School. And if you look around the hall, we have two other original pieces of artwork by Prescott Whitney, one toward the back and one off to my right. There are little orange signs on each one to call your attention. Perhaps lady would like to file by and give them a closer look. One of Alice's recurring jobs outside the home was working at the Surry post office. She filled in whenever the postmaster, Frank Whitney, had to be away, either through illness or because of some other assignment. Now, just a few words about Frank Whitney. He enlisted in the Marine Corps in 1914 at the outbreak of World War I. He was sent to France after just 30 days of training in the use of a machine gun. He engaged in many fierce battles on the Western Front and escaped injury until October 3, 1918, when he was gravely wounded in the abdomen by shrapnel, while advancing on a German machine gun nest. When reached by medics hours later, he was given first aid, but they considered him a goner. But after 5 operations over several years, he recovered and was partially restored to health. The French awarded him the Croix de Guerre, a medal for exceptional bravery in battle. After his return to the United States, he worked in New England in various places selling appliances. But he settled in Surry in 1929 and was appointed the U.S. Postmaster here in 1930. His hobby was raising flowers, and his specialty was delphiniums. He was active in the Farm Bureau and very knowledgeable about agricultural topics, gave talks, including at the University of Maine, and he remained Surry's postmaster until the early 1950s. Now, what did Albert do when he came home from the war to earn a living? I'll read you some entries from Alice's diary. January 1st, 1946. Albert and Richard, that would be Richard McGraw, smelted at Morgan's Bay for the first time, got about 50 pounds. There's a good price for them now. And just a reminder, this photograph is of smelt fishing on Patterns Bay. But there was also a fishing operation on Morgan's Bay, and I was not able to find a photo of smelt tanks on Morgan's Bay for tonight. Perhaps somebody can come up with one and contribute it. Alice wrote on the 3rd of January, got smelt returns from Ford, the fish dealer, paid only 25 cents a pound, said the smelts came in poor condition. Always before we'd get from 40 cents to 45 cents a pound. Was I furious? January 9th, Albert sold $14.08 worth of smelts to Forrest Carter, local storekeeper. He got returns of $19.06 from Century Fish Company. Albert is doing swell smelting this winter. I added up all of the recorded catches that Albert had that winter, combed through the diary. He got about 800 pounds of smelts that winter.
Last winter, John contacted me and he asked me if I had a woman in my family named Alma Black. And I laughed and I said, yeah, that was my dad. And the reason he asked about Alma Black was because in her diaries, to separate Al Gaspar from Al Black, she called Al Alma. So that made more sense, and it made more sense to John once he knew that. My dad told the story of them coming to Alice's home with a mess of smelts after they had been fishing, and they literally dumped them on the kitchen floor. All of them. Yeah, I was again, I couldn't believe it. But that's what they did. They dumped them on her kitchen floor and probably sorted them, I don't know, by size or by something, and then perhaps put them in crates and iced them and sawdust them and then took them somewhere to be sold or to the train or whatever. But I told John that story and he said, oh, you've got to share that. Imagine it.
Now, a smelt, as you can see, is a very small fish. Small but delicious. And you can imagine how many smelts it took to make up 800 pounds. But Surry had a thriving smelt fishery for about 100 years. And smelts from Maine and other coastal towns, smelts from Surry and other Maine coastal towns were in great demand at the fish markets in Boston and New York. This postcard, dated 1916, is from the Cassius Hunt and Company fish dealership in Boston. This postcard was sent to a local man, Clark Cousins, and the message on the reverse side reads, Dear Sir, we are waiting for you to send your smelts to us. Smelts are very scarce and sell for high prices. Let them come along at once. Emphasis in the original. Yours respectfully, C. Hunt.
January 2nd, Mama and I went over to Tilly's to the Christmas Club. That would have been in East Blue Hill. And Tilly Leach would have a Christmas Club. But by January 23rd, the Red Cross was supposed to meet in the church for an all-day meeting, but it was 10 below zero, rather cold, and too cold to heat such a large room, so met here at Alice's, had 12 to dinner, talked over plans for a Christmas Club in Surry. So Alice was very interested in getting a Christmas Club started in Surry, as well as going to the East Blue Hill Christmas Club. The Surry Historical Society has a copy January 28th, wanted to show this slide because it's 5 days later, it is still 10 below zero. So if you're hot this evening, just think of that cold and you might appreciate being warm this evening. Christmas and Community Club was organized here at my house, Alice's, in the evening. 12 came and several others are joining that were unable to come tonight. Had sandwiches, cookies, olives, and coffee for refreshment. Officers were elected. Alice was the president. Ines Frost, vice president. Muriel McGraw, who's my mother, was treasurer. Helen McGraw was Jane Smith's mom and my aunt, secretary. Had a lovely evening. Again, we have the Surry Historical Society has a copy of the 1971 program, which was the 25-year celebration of the organization of the Surry Club. In it was a list of the charter members, and tonight we have the Ingold sisters, Charlotte and Joy, who are the charter members, and they're here with us this evening. Would you please stand? At a typical meeting, poems were read, some were written by the members themselves, money put into their Christmas Club account, songs were sung, and a fun time was had by all. At Christmas time, Joy reminded me that the members made popcorn bags for all of the school children. And I remember them very well. There was popcorn, hard candy, and ribbon candy, and 2 chocolate-covered cream drops, or 2 chocolate-covered cherries in each bag. And those were my favorite. In addition to these fun evenings of the Christmas Club, they sometimes had a costume party. And this is a photo of a Christmas Club party. I suspect that this one in particular was taken in for a Halloween party, but Alice has an entry in April of 1946 that says, April 8th, busy the last of the afternoon getting our costumes ready for a party down to Muriel McGraw's. Xmas Club met there, everyone in costume, some old-fashioned and some just cutting. All members there had a grand time. Every day of my life is so busy. Oh, for a day long enough. Everyone has that feeling sometimes, right? So then, April 22nd, her next entry of the Christmas Club, so they met every other week. Washed in the AM, ironed in the afternoon, busy getting ready for Christmas Club. Entertained Surry Christmas Club in the evening, 16 here. Had light refreshments of cheese, crackers, donuts, and coffee. Had a nice evening, but feel very tired. Getting up so early mornings and going all day, I get tired. Life is always a mad rush. So, there was Farm Bureau, and Grange, and Christmas Club, movies, card playing, and Johnny will tell you more about what kept Elvis so busy.
This entry is from the 2nd of January 1946. Alice wrote, "Went down to Morgan's Bay to the Townsend Club. Had fun. I won Beano twice right off. Got a package of Rinso and a pound of soda for prizes." How many of you in the room know what the Townsend Club is or was? I see there are a few. Okay, I want to describe the Townsend Club, the Townsend movement. It's something that I just learned about in these diaries. In 1934, in the midst of the Great Depression, Dr. Francis Townsend, a retired medical doctor, advocated an old age pension plan that would have awarded $200 every month to people over 60 who were no longer working, provided that such money was spent within the U.S. within 30 days. His proposal was intended as a depression recovery program, as well as help for the elderly needy. The Townsend Plan was very popular. Within 2 years of the publication of his plan, there were over 7,000 Townsend clubs, including one in Surry, and they had 2.2 million active members, working to make the Townsend Plan the nation's old age pension system. At one point in 1936, Townsend was able to deliver petitions to Congress containing 10 million signatures in support of his plan. And public opinion polls in 1935 showed that 56% of Americans supported the plan. Now, most economists, many or most economists, thought that his plan was mathematically suspect and not feasible. Despite its popularity, Congress repeatedly rejected bills to implement it. President Franklin Roosevelt opposed it, although he didn't oppose the idea of a Social Security system for the elderly. But the pressure from the Townsend movement helped to propel the passage of Social Security as a more workable and mathematically sound plan. Legislation creating Social Security was signed in August of 1935, and compared to Townsend's call for $200 a month, the initial Social Security benefits were miserly, and the first monthly checks were not mailed until 1940. In this interval, Townsend continued to exert his influence for higher benefits, and he played a hand in subsequent expansions of the program until the 1950s, when the increasing effectiveness of the Social Security system led to the decline of the Townsend movement. The doctor died in 1960. This is Dr. Francis Townsend. And this is the old schoolhouse on Morgan's Bay. It's the place where the Townsend Club met every Wednesday. Nationally, the Townsend Clubs met weekly on Wednesday evenings. The building was in better repair when the Townsend Club was there. This was after it wasn't being used anymore. As part of a way to draw people to the meetings, a couple of local musicians began playing. Frank and B. Gibbons. One played the violin, one played the guitar. They started going to meetings, and after the business part, they would bring back the chairs and people would dance. And they had very popular dances with as many as 50 people attending. But when the Gibbonses pulled out of the Townsend Club, there was no more music, there were no more dances, and the club withered and died. Now, with us tonight, we have Walter Kane, who was approximately a 10-year-old boy, went to the Townsend Club and learned how to dance. And Joyce Small's mother, Hope Ingalls, actually taught Walter Kane how to dance. And we'll ask Walter if he'd like to make a few comments about those years at the Townsend Club.
I have to go right if I can't hear anything in there. I started attending the Townsend Club about 1945, and it was a small group of citizens from around Morgan Valley. I think of Guy Carter and Mary and John Candy, and Brooks and Rosie Candy, and two others were attending this at that time. They were looking for additional people to come. We used to play bingo by cars. Each one of you had 13 cars, and they called off, and then you won with bingo. Well, before we would start, they'd say the Pledge of Allegiance, and then they'd say, the Townsend plan will succeed. Therefore, I pledge allegiance to its principles and its founder, Dr. Francis E. Townsend. And there was more to that creed than that. That's all I can remember. Well, then all the black got involved in it, and then it took off. There was a lot of people coming. And then the big thing that happened was Frank Gibbons and Dee Guy, that were over here, came with the violin and guitar. And after we played bingo, we moved the chairs and things all back, and we had a dance. And that was a real fun thing, and they brought people like crazy because we had a great time. And I was about 10 years old, and I learned to dance there. I used to dance with George's mama a lot, and some other elderly ladies.
She also taught Jimmy Carter how to dance.
Oh, yeah. Well, it was a great time. We had a lot of fun. As long as the music kept going, the thing kept moving and making more money. But by that time, Social Security had kicked in good shape, so they weren't sending the money to Townsend. And eventually, once the music stopped coming every week, the thing died. And it was a great time, great time for Morgan Day for several years.
Thank you, Walter. Okay, back to work. In January of 1946, Albert bought a horse. Which he named Dick, to help him work in the woods. Besides cutting pulpwood and firewood on the Gasper family lots at North Bend, Albert and Dick hauled wood for others, including for Russell Stevens on Newbury Neck. Alice wrote in January of 1946, made a horse blanket out of some old blankets that Myra Whitney gave us. The horse was delivered today at noontime. In March, she wrote, Albert got $20.50 a cord for spool wood. He's made such good money all winter, better than he ever made, even more than he made when he worked in the shipyard. Wood is golden these days. Later in March, she wrote, sold a cord of wood to Mrs. Weber over to East Surry. Everybody wants wood now. Toward the end of 1946, Alice wrote that Albert got a check for spool wood for $164 and a check for logs for $245. Sometimes Alice would ride with Dick and Albert delivering wood to customers, but Dick just didn't haul wood. Alice reports on a January snowstorm. Wind so strong all day, road was full. Abby Ingalls was behind me in the school bus. We had to get out and shovel in places just to get through. Coming home, I got stuck in the ditch, so had to get Dick to pull us out. We love our horse. Sometimes Albert would hitch Dick up to a buggy and Alice and Albert would just go out for a pleasure ride, and sometimes they would give rides to children. Albert's other pursuits in making a living in Surry at that time, I'll summarize these with diary entries. There are 3 from July of 1946. Albert worked all day until 6 o'clock, haying, which didn't please me a bit. It was the 4th of July. Albert bought 50 acres of land for blueberry fields off of Dolph Kane. He paid $200. Albert started raking berries for Robert Carlyle. Didn't think Albert was going to rake berries this year, but everyone is making such good money he thought he'd get in on it. Albert also grew corn to sell to local merchants, including Willard Kane and Max Hinckley of Blue Hill. Alice wrote, Albert has sold about 135 dozen ears of corn this fall. Sorry he didn't plant more.
Not everything went smoothly in Surry. The winter of discontent in 1946 was due to, surprisingly or maybe not, the Methodist Church, which is pictured here, the Surry Methodist Church on Main Street. George Bullens was the minister of the Surry Church and apparently lived in Ellsworth without a car. Someone would go to pick him up and then bring him to the church and for the services on Sundays, and then take him home. In January, rumblings about the minister's salary was causing some problems. By May, there was such a to-do over issues that there was a vote to use the Union Church on the crossroads. Voted to use the Union Church Bay instead of village churches. There's so much fuss all the time. May 2nd, everyone pretty upset about going to Morgan's Bay Church after they'd thought it over. So spent the day consulting people about it. Guess we'll have a church meeting Sunday night before any more is done about it. And then Alice writes, June 23rd, no church. No one went for George. Apparently, since no one went to get George, there was no more church in 1946. At least Alice did not record any attendance after that in her diary. And here is the picture of the Crossroads Church that was the other controversy of when people didn't want to go to the Surry Church on Main Street, but didn't want to go to that church either, apparently. So, John.
Okay, a word about food shortages during the war years. Alice wrote in May of 1946, in the afternoon went down to Helen McGraw's. She and I went greening around her place. I canned 4 pints and cooked some for supper. They tasted so good. Food is scarcer now than during the war. No shortening can be bought anywhere. We are fortunate to have butter from Albert's mother. Starting today, only 1 mail a day because of the coal strike. It's tying up everything in the country. It's very serious. In August, she wrote, meat, and in fact most foods, seem more plentiful now, but prices are simply terrific, worst I've ever seen. In September, she wrote, worst meat shortage we've ever had. It's dreadful. Reported in paper yesterday, coal miners in Virginia, West Virginia, and Kentucky would stop work unless meat becomes available at a reasonable price. So all of this led to what is known as the beefsteak election. 1946 was an election year. By 1946, with the horrors of the war over and peace beginning to be prosperous, The economy was booming, unemployment dropped, consumer appliances were available again to the public. All of this, quote, all of this adds up to a splendid achievement, declared President Truman in a speech in October of that year. But while the economy soared, President Truman's approval ratings plummeted, and that was caused mainly by the state of American meat. During World War II, most of the nation's red meat supply was shipped to fighting men abroad. And starting in 1942, meat was heavily rationed on the home front. Government price ceilings on what meat remained drove many butchers out of business, and for years, meat eaters throughout the country could not find steak or pork chops for their dinner unless they went to the black market or unless they grew it themselves. When the war ended in 1945, controls were lifted, but pent-up demand sent the price of beef skyrocketing 70%. Hoping to improve his opinion ratings, in the summer of 1946, Truman imposed price ceilings on meat. American cattlemen, enjoying their recent bonanza, retaliated by withholding their animals from the market. Another meat shortage ensued. Most Americans were outraged. Miners declared they could not work without more meat, and they began striking in Washington state. Midterm congressional elections were just months away, and Truman's fellow Democrats, who then held a majority in both houses of Congress, bore the brunt of the public's anger. Exasperated, President Truman gave in to public pressure and lifted the restrictions on the price of meat just weeks before the election, but it was too late. In spite of his efforts, voters went to the polls in 1946 declaring no meat, no vote. Representative Sam Rayburn dubbed it, quote, a damned beefsteak election. When the votes were counted, the American passion for beef had caused the Democratic Party to lose control of Congress for the first time in 16 years. There was another shortage during the war. Cotton material. Alice wrote in August of 46, in the evening, I got some grain bags ripped up, washed, and pressed to make dresses out of. Can't buy any cotton dress material anywhere. This is not Alice Gasper and Helen McGraw. This is Ethel Mertz and Lucy Ricardo. They're wearing high-fashion dresses made out of potato bags, potato sacks. And that's up there because I couldn't find a picture of Alice in a grain bag dress, so this will just have to do.
Alice reported many illnesses and deaths of friends and relatives in her diary. "37 people that she knew died during those 3 years, including Albert's father. Some young, some old, some expected, some tragically unexpected. And here is an example of one of the latter, which is particularly of note as this Surry death was investigated. Harvey Young burned to death in his camp at 3 o'clock this a.m. Think there is foul play as he was with 2 other fellows in the evening, investigating it. September 30th. Have a hearing in Ellsworth this afternoon pertaining to the fire and death of Harvey Young. Another terrible tragedy in Surry. So many awful things have happened there." On October 2nd, 1946, the Ellsworth American wrote that the fire was believed to have been caused by an overturned kerosene lamp. The fire was discovered by a neighbor, Ward Carter, and the Ellsworth Fire Department was summoned, but the 2-room cottage was destroyed when they arrived. So, no foul play, but a very tragic accident of a 31-year-old World War II veteran.
A few diary entries, this one from June of 1946. Above Albert and Mother's protests, I ordered a telephone put in the house. September 7th, 1946, Mother called up saying our electric refrigerator had arrived, so we went home. So pleased with my refrigerator, a large Kelvinator to the tune of $296. As appliances like Alice's Kelvinator started turning up in more and more American homes, the ice harvesting business went into decline, including in Surry. This photo shows members of the Saunders family harvesting ice from Toddy Pond for delivery to local ice houses. As we can see from the changes in the Gasper home, with the addition of a phone and a fridge, the end of World War II ushered in the beginning of a more modern age, more electrified, more gadgetized, especially in rural America. And that concludes our talk.
A fun trip down memory lane, and again, a thank you to Bill Allen for making it possible.